Hey, welcome in. I'm Rita, and this is the story I'm telling myself. If you've ever felt like you're standing in your own way, you are not alone. Let's get into it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Story I'm Telling Myself podcast. I'm so excited to have Nancy Griffin with us today. And we're having a little tech issue. We don't know what's going on. Maybe an update in StreamYard. I'm not sure. That's getting in the way of Nancy's camera, but we're going to do this episode with you regardless of that. So if you are here with us live for this episode, thank you. We love having you in the comments. We love engaging and interacting with you. So please come jump in the comments now. Welcome our guest, Nancy. Introduce yourselves. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Nancy so she can introduce herself to all of us. Hi, Nancy. Welcome. Tell everybody who you are.
Hi, Rita. Thank you so much. And the good news is at least we have audio. So we also have to be thankful for what we have rather than focusing on what we don't have. And of course, I got myself all gussied up for this event, and you won't see how lovely, beautiful I am. Oh, well, whatever. Anyway, I am Nancy Griffin, and my business is Women Worth and Wellness. It is 32 years old this year. And how it came about was when I was a wealth advisor. And I started in the wealth advisory business in 1992 in Toronto. And of course, you've got to have all your licenses. And you want to be with a company that has a great training program. And so all of those things I had. And then they said, okay, Nancy, there's just one thing missing. And that is you don't have any clients. You've got to go find your own clients. Okay, well, isn't this lovely? Because I had come from a corporate role. And of course, you're not you're looking after all of your responsibilities, but you're not an entrepreneur. Now you're definitely an entrepreneur. You're on your way to building your own business. And so their advice was very sound. They said, what's really, really important is you're going to be in this business for 30 or 40 years. You're going to establish relationships with really special people, but you really want to be working with people that you care about, because you're going to bring all your expertise forward, but in a way that matters to them. You are at their service, helping to enhance their lives. And so it was 1992. I decided I would focus on women, not exclusively, but during the early 90s, that was when women were really starting to earn more money on their own to the point where they really wanted to pay attention to the whole wealth scenario. So at the time, we had this terrific investment company, really, really incredible. And they too were realizing the opportunity of working with women. So they created a whole marketing program called Investing in Yourself. So they had all these materials. All I needed to do was organize an event, advertise, promote, and invite. So I did. And it was a Saturday morning in November in 1992 at a really exclusive golf club. And I had the whole marketing program. So I had a whole presentation. I just needed some guests attending. I had over 150 women who came. And I found that first Saturday in November is a real sweet spot because it's after the summer and kids are back at school, but it's before Christmas. And I also found that Saturday morning is a time when women can make themselves available for a couple of hours. And so now I've got my whole group of prospects. So I started to meet with these women one at a time.
I'm gonna pause you there because we don't have time for your whole business startup story. Sorry, that's not what we're here for. So sorry, Nancy, I'm going to cut you off, and I want to say, hey, Meryl, great to have you join us. I'm glad I saw your message. If you want to connect with Nancy, womenworthwellness.com is the website, and you can learn all about her, and you can set up a chat with her and finish hearing the story about her very first and very successful launch of her business. But we're going to talk about today, Nancy, is the journey that you took to get to that moment, because you entered the workforce. You worked for Procter Gamble, a very well-known, very large corporation, but you entered that company as a clerk without a college degree. And you managed to convert from that opportunity to show and prove yourself and begin to rise in the ranks at Procter and Gamble. But what we want to talk about is that internal narrative, that self-limiting story that you had about your education status and how that began to impact you during that climb. So start us there. Talk a little bit about your early days at Procter and Gamble and your quest to grow inside of that company.
Okay, away I'll go. And you cut me off again whenever you want. Feel free to do that. No, it was very interesting because I didn't go to university, but I always expected. So I never learned how to type. And so I was extremely limited in what I could do. So I entered Procter and Gamble as a clerk, and I was in the credit and collections department. And Procter and Gamble only promotes from within. They may have changed their policies now, but primarily that's what they did. And so all of their recruiting was done on campus. They would go to the top universities and they would recruit the top talent. And Procter and Gamble's a fabulous company, so invariably they would get the best of the top talent. So what ended up happening was they were recruiting new supervisors into this credit and collections department. And guess who was training them? And finally, one of them said, you know what? If she's doing all the training, she knows at least as much as we do and probably more. I think she should be promoted into management. And that was a big, big, big deal. You know, there were two classes. One was non-management and the other was management. So for me to be promoted, that was a big deal. And also being a female, I was one of the first female managers at Procter and Gamble. But the key to success, of course, is having that male champion. I never,
Oh,
ever would have
yes.
gotten anywhere if he hadn't said, wait a minute, this isn't right, that she's not getting the benefits that we're getting. Give her a chance. So, of course, that's what I did. And went on, was successful, then was recruited into HR. And that was a gem. That was wonderful. I did all sorts of different assignments in the HR department, a lot of management training, and a lot of management training came from Procter and Gamble in Cincinnati. So I started to meet a lot of key people in Cincinnati who were recruiting me for an international assignment. But I had a manager, a VP, who didn't think that women should be allowed to go on business travel, let alone be transferred internationally, because I had a small daughter, I had a husband who had a career. So they were being blocked, and I didn't know until years later. All I knew was that I was not advancing to the extent that I should be. And so that's when I decided to
Right.
return. I left, I resigned.
Yeah, well, I unfortunately, I think the thing that you are naming is a very common thing. I mean, first of all, it is extremely beneficial to have a champion.
Right.
In fact, there are coaches, career coaches who will encourage you. If you're a young listener, maybe a newly minted college graduate just starting on your journey, a good career coach is going to tell you, go out and find a champion inside of your organization. Hey, Christy, welcome. So happy to see you with us this morning, because champions are important. However, what you came to realize in relying on that champion, Nancy, is that you were more passive than participating.
Exactly. And women never, ever, ever want to be seen as being aggressive, because that's the first thing they're criticized for being. But really, you have to back it up, and you have to be your own advocate, your own agent every step of the way, rather than I was very, very passive. And I'm not a passive person, as you can imagine, but you're just waiting for them to offer you something that they think you would be worthy of, rather than you bringing yourself to their attention. Because fast forward, the day after I resigned, I get a call from a colleague who I had worked with, and he invited me to come on an international assignment in Geneva. And I said, well, you know what? That would have been great if you'd teed that up 12 to 18 months ago. But at this point in time, I'm heading off in another direction, and I'm running for a major political opportunity. So it's really interesting. Had I been an advocate for myself, probably even 10 years sooner, 5 years, anything, I mean, there were people that did think well of me, but just weren't advancing me or championing me.
I found myself falling into that same trap of my early successes, my early opportunities to grow came because somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, I think you should apply for this job," or "Hey, we would like to promote you to this opportunity." And so the story that got settled in my head was that somebody will let you know when you're ready.
Right,
Right. And
right.
so I found myself sort of acting on that. What was the story, the internal story that you held, Nancy, that kept you from advocating for yourself in that early part of your career?
Well, you just never wanted to be seen to be aggressive. You wanted to be
Okay.
respectful, and you felt that they knew what they were doing and that they knew that you were doing good work. When you had performance reviews, they were good performance reviews. I think during those performance reviews, I could have been more assertive and said, okay, well, let's talk about some options for me. And if I let's understand what the options would be for me, and let's discuss those possibilities and how would that play out. Now, that's a very active approach to be taking without being aggressive. I mean, fair enough. A
Right.
performance review is about you seeing me and me seeing you, the company. And let's have that conversation. I never took that approach.
I have a young person, a daughter who is in her 20s, who's in her first stage of her career, and I am coaching her regularly when she's bringing issues to me about advocating for herself at work, because it's one of those things that I think is easy for us to do when we've walked the decades on this earth in the workplace that you and I have walked, Nancy, but harder to do when you're
Right.
in your first decade in the workplace to really know how to navigate that. But just like in a health journey or anything else, financial journey, which you coach people on now. It's important that you know what you want and you know how to advocate. And at that time, men who had children were giving these assignments without hesitation. And so I'm curious to know, when you heard that your status as a mother was being presented as a roadblock for you to move into the international assignment that you desired. Um, what story did that trigger for you?
I was just aghast, just aghast. There were two things that I learned. One is the whole business of women in leadership is continues to be a major challenge. I mean, I'm way along in years from where this all began and where I could have behaved differently. But the whole issue of women in leadership is still a barrier. So I think it's important to get to know those people that are making the decisions and what is their attitude. And I'm referring to men, but it also can refer to women. If women have had a big struggle to get to that powerful position, they may feel that you need to struggle as much as they did rather than going out of their way to be champions for you. So,
Yes, I have seen and heard that directly as somebody who parachutes into organizations and works with their leadership. I am often shocked at how often I hear, "Look, it was so hard for me coming up, and they need to do their," and it's
right,
like, wow, if that was so hard, if you felt like you gave up such important things in your life, why would you want that for somebody else? But it is interesting how people have that
exactly.
perspective.
And the whole world has an abundance of opportunity for everyone. And more often than not, if you don't drop the ladder behind you and you go out of your way to champion others, not just young women, but young men as well. I mean, the whole issue of young men being acknowledged and recognized is a bigger topic than ever. And so, really, don't be so selfish. Don't be so caught up in yourself and don't think the world is all about you. Really, think about you. What can you give back? Who can you help? How can you champion someone else? And more often than not, that will come back to you tenfold.
Yes, and we're going to get into that in a minute. I just want to say hello to Melissa Houston, new to the show. Meryl, thanks for inviting her. Melissa, we're glad to have you with us today. Jump in, add your comments or your questions along the way. We'd love to hear from you. So, Nancy, you left this corporate life and made a big pivot in many ways by moving into politics. And it's interesting because politics is a lot about advocacy. So talk to us a little bit about what was it that drew you into this pivot that you made?
Well, it was an incident. The women's clothing store where I did all my purchases, remember in the 90s, women were in the 80s, in the 70s, 80s, it would be the 80s. Women had their little suits and they had their little ties and they had their little blouses. And this lady's store I did all my shopping at. And of course, I'm face down, corporate job, family to look after, and not doing anything in the community. And out of the blue, I'm recruited by my neighbor next door to go onto the community, not the foundation, but just the community group that was looking out for various aspects of making the community better. And they said, okay, Nancy, you're in charge of community engagement. Well, no big deal. Okay, I can handle that. Anyway, out of the blue, don't we have one terrible, terrible incident? And at that time, we had a Mexican student living with us in the neighborhood, very, very safe, North Toronto. Out of the blue, don't we have an incident where this man in a halfway house, supposedly being rehabilitated into society, escapes and murders this woman who had worked for this women's clothing store. So they said, okay, Nancy, this is your community engagement. So all of a sudden, my portfolio has gone from 0 to 4,000. But the one thing I learned at Procter Gamble, which was a really, really important learning, is when something like that happens, no one person is responsible. It's a failure of the whole system and how these different groups are interacting, all the different levels of government. So that's exactly what happened. So all of a sudden, I'm the spokesperson talking about, okay, this is a federal facility, but the police department was right around the corner and they didn't know that this person was there. Meanwhile, the provincial candidate at the time was the person who was being the greatest champion for all of this. So my job was to bring them all together and say, we all have responsibility in this community. How are we going to work to make things better? Because we all thought this was a safe community, and now we see that there are gaps. So that's what I ended up doing. Well, then the more I got involved with it, the more I could see that there was a whole lot more work to do. That's when I decided to resign and run politically. Because running politically, you will have a group who will come and hear what you have to say. So my challenge was to present myself exceptionally well. I knew I wasn't going to win this opportunity, but I knew that if I made my points clearly, then people would realize we've got more work to do in this community. So that's exactly what I did. And it was incredible. It really was. I mean, it just opens your eyes to so much of what goes on in a community that you either don't know about or you take for granted.
So looking back on that time in your life and making the comparison of the young professional you were at Procter and Gamble in your early development years and the person you were required to be at this important time in your community, what permissions did you have to shift and give yourself in order for you to be as effective as you needed to be in your community that maybe you were withholding from yourself in your corporate life?
Right. Well, first of all, I had to be extremely professional wherever I was. Didn't matter what you're doing, you need to present yourself professionally. But at the same time, I was now presenting myself with a whole lot more chutzpah. And when this incident happened, it was like you want to scream off the top of a building. Well, you can't do that because they'll take you away. So that's why strategically I felt if I run for this opportunity, I will be one of the candidates that has to present themselves, which is exactly what I did. And it was so much fun. I mean, really, all of a sudden you are rising to a new level, which is kind of unnerving because you realize that there's a whole lot below you that isn't protecting you. Like now you've put yourself out there, so you better just proceed with caution, but at the same time keep on going, because you know what you have in mind is absolutely right. And so you need to present yourself accordingly, so that that right will capture other people's attention, so that we can make things better.
So one of the things that I observe, I have worked very closely with a friend of mine locally here in the U.S. who is part of my state legislative group in her campaign and her work. But government operates very differently than corporations operate. And the way that you navigate relationships, those kinds of things are they are similar, and yet there are also some stark differences that are there. What are some of the things that you began to notice in as you stepped into this political arena about what you needed to learn and who you had to evolve to in order to be successful?
Well, at any given moment in time, you're always operating on a 360-degree basis. You're always paying attention to everything that's going on around you. Extremely important. Like, really take the time to take in what in the world is going on. Who are the key people? Who are the people that you thought were key that are now letting you down? Okay, if they're letting you down, what are you going to do about it? Maybe you just let them go. Let them go. Why are you spending more time on them? Go spend some time on perhaps somebody who's going to help you do something else. I think it's a whole bunch of pivots and redirections. And that's why the 360 approach is extremely important. And also, don't get bogged down with negativity, because when somebody does let you down, don't spend half a day trying to track after them because they let you down. They let you down. What could you have done differently? Why did they let you down? Make a decision whether you're going to patch it up and keep on going, or, as I mentioned earlier, you just let that contact go, because there are lots of other contacts out there with whom you can work. So it's a continual 360, paying attention to your environment, having a good sense of who you are, and really what are you trying to accomplish, so that when stuff gets in the way, default back to your overall goal of what you are trying to accomplish.
I love this advice, and I think, I'm thinking of my daughter in her 20s. So any of you listeners who have young people in the first decades of their career life, I think this is really, really valuable. So make sure that you share these words from Nancy with them. This idea that when things will go awry, just expect that things will not always go exactly the way that you want them to. And when they do, you have to be judicious about the kind of energy that you give those moments. And I love this thought that you shared, Nancy, about looking at yourself and saying, okay, how could I have handled that differently? I think that's the perfect way to learn in any situation of disappointment, because we are the only part of that equation that we get to control. It's ourselves.
Exactly.
Everything else is outside of our control. So if you just focus on what you can control and figure out how to better that part of the equation, the next situation you come upon, you're going to land in a better place.
Exactly. You are the treasure. And I always encourage people, especially women with families and big job responsibilities, is you've got to take that time with yourself in the morning to have a little talk with yourself. Like, you have a sense of where you're headed and what you want. How am I doing? What should I be doing differently? What have I missed? Who else can I help? Whatever. You just have to have that time with yourself. It's just kind of a major reset every day, so that, there's an opportunity for a redirection, or there's an opportunity to go back to that same person who let you down and say, is there something that I can help you with? Robin Williams was
Yes.
the person who said, always be kind. You have absolutely no idea what's going on in people's lives that you don't know about. So always be kind. And maybe that act of kindness, circling back to somebody who let you down, might just help that person advance and realize that nobody was paying attention to them. I had an incident recently. You get a kick out of this. I was at a women's conference, And I've been at the same group before, and there's a photographer, and she is absolutely everywhere. So both times, 6 months ago and then recently, taking pictures of everybody all the time. Well, we broke for lunch, and I see her sitting at a table at the back having her lunch, and we smile. And I said, "Well, that's a picture. You don't know whether she wants, if I'm being too invasive or." Anyway, she said, "Oh, that's interesting." So I took her picture. Anyway, then I shared her picture, and then I said, "Make sure that pictures is part of your reel when you." Anyway, then this whole dialogue began, and she basically ended up saying, "Thank you for seeing me." Like, thank you for seeing me. She spent her whole day seeing everybody else, and nobody's paying attention to her. And I thought that said so much. Thank you for seeing me. So you never
Yes.
know what a little act of kindness can make a difference in someone else's life. And of course,
So this
imagine how I felt when she gave me that compliment back. So it isn't just about her, it's about you too.
So this episode, our question is: are you an active participant in your life? And Nancy, despite the reasons that you left Procter and Gamble, you could still say you were being a very active participant because you knew when to walk away and say, this no longer serves me, which is also an important discernment that we all have to have. But you made that choice to leave. You stepped into this arena and decided to put your time and commitment behind your community and giving back to the community, which all political leaders do. And it's very important to our society that we have people like you. So thank you for that time. But you came to a point where you decided to move on from that into your wealth business. So tell us a little bit about that decision, how you were actively participating in your life when you made this then third career shift into wealth advisory.
Okay, well, it goes back to the 360 point because I leapt into this community leadership role. Well, the more you do, the more they ask you to do. And after 3 years of that, I thought, oh my goodness, I've got to get a job out of this community because they know where I live and it's never ending. And I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. So I was invited to join this consulting firm, but it was a different firm than I had worked with. So I went to one of their sessions and met this woman who was working with a different group. So I asked her if we could have coffee. So again, here I am being my own agent. So we have coffee. She hears what I'm planning on doing. And she said, "Nancy, I don't know why you're going to do that for the next 20 years of your life. Really, I'm not so sure that that's a growth industry." She had been a VP at a big company in Canada and had been given a bag load of money, went to this one guy. She did not like the advice she was being given. So what she did, she started into wealth advisory herself. And so she said, "Nancy, I think this is something you should take a look at." Now I'm going 180 degrees in another direction from where I'm headed. And had she not been a champion for me, and had I not paid attention to what she was recommending, I never would have been in wealth management. Once I got into wealth management, I was sorry I hadn't been there 10 years early. I really was sorry, but that person made all the difference in my life. And it was just a moment in time. We didn't become good friends or even good contacts. She just linked me up with her manager, met her manager. We got along. He said, "Go get your licenses," and, blah, blah, blah. And of course, the rest is history.
And I love and this gets to a quote that Meryl put in. I want to share this. Don't forget to send the elevator back down. And I think that story is a great example of that. I mean, here's somebody who there was nothing in it for her, but she saw you in that moment. She saw you. She saw your passion. She saw your capability. She saw all of the things that had her draw this very quick conclusion that she could see a different path for you, and she offered that to you. And what a kindness that is
Amazing.
to
Amazing.
to yeah, to speak new possibilities into people.
And all she did was introduce the opportunity for my consideration. There were no guarantees. She wasn't overriding anything. She was just saying, this is what I think you should take a look at doing. This is what I'm doing. And again, it was women and wealth. And she said, I think there's a huge opportunity given the things that you've done, especially being in HR. There are a lot of things that you know that you can bring to the table in that role. And it was so true.
Well, and it really is a beautiful bridge to the advocacy that you found in the political arena, because as you were starting to share in the intro, what you entered this role at a time when women's salaries were starting to grow, women's opportunities were growing, and women needed to be educated about wealth building. And you could get very passionate, and you are very passionate about helping women understand so that they have the financial securities that so many men had had known the pathway to, but at that time was not really available to women.
Exactly. The other thing that I did, Rita, was I partnered with a hospital in Toronto called Women's College Hospital, over 100 years old, doing all sorts of seminars and events on women's health. But I also started their first golf tournament. Remember, the 90s was when women said, wait a minute, I think I need to learn how to play golf because that's where all the guys are. And so did their first
Yeah,
golf.
I mean, let's be honest. It was just like, if you want to rise in business, you got to follow the men's playbook. I mean, that was the '90s thing, and I'm so happy that I think we have sort of evolved past that now. But yes, yes.
Exactly. No, it was terrific. Really, really terrific. But again, being an entrepreneur and having to build your own business, obviously you've got to advocate for yourself. You've got to figure it out. And that's my point about 360. Pay attention to trends, pay attention to people, pay attention to you versus those trends and those people so that you can bring your best forward. And I'm doing this series now with accomplished women, and they share their 3 pearls of wisdom. This one woman said her number 1 was ride the wave. So that's really, in essence, what I'm saying is figure out what's going on, who you want to be with, where you fit in. And if it's working, then carry on, keep on doing it and do it as well as you possibly can.
Well, I find it interesting, Nancy, that many people speak about the millennial generation and the fact that they have so many big career transitions. And you are not a millennial.
That's for sure.
You're a little bit older than a millennial, but I think that you have found success in each of these paths. You were very successful at Procter and Gamble. You were very successful in leading and implementing the things that you care about in your community. And now you've had many decades very successful in your wealth management work. Being able to live into the passion, to the things that you care deeply about, where you have real meaning in your work. And I think when we are chasing meaning, when we are trying to organize our lives around things that really bring us deep fulfillment, it does mean that sometimes you have to give yourself permission to pivot and change course.
Exactly. And that's why you need to keep talking to yourself. Like, really, how am I doing? What do I want? What else can I think about that would make me really happy? Who else can I help? Think about beyond yourself, because giving back really has big dividends in terms of who you know that you might share with somebody else, obviously from a financial standpoint, but thinking about something beyond yourself is finding a way to bring your own treasure forward.
I love that. And I just find your story so inspiring, Nancy. I think this is the perfect timing. I keep saying that there's serendipity in this show, and having this particular conversation at this juncture when we just graduated so many amazing young people out of colleges and high schools that are entering the workforce, that are starting that first decade. I want you all to hear and know that you don't have to have it all figured out. Follow your meaning in this moment and know that the next pivot will come when it's time for it to come, and you'll be ready for it. And if you are looking for a little inspiration, Nancy just gave it to you because she has walked this path ahead of you, and she would champion it all over again. So you are on a good and solid path. Nancy, before we close the show, any final words of wisdom you want to share with our listeners?
I'll just reinforce what you just said. Our daughter, when she was in grade 8, heading into high school, had a psychologist to come in to speak to these. She was at a private girls' school. And the psychologist said, you don't have to think about what you want to be when you grow up. You think about, what do I want to do first? And that's just reinforcing what you just said and what I'm saying is your life is an adventure. And more than ever, you have to pay attention to what's going on around you. When they chose the courses that they ended up graduating from, the world is probably much different, and they might have chosen things differently. But you know what? So what? None of us can go back. We pay attention to what's going on right now. What are the trends? What are the opportunities? What do I want? How does this all fit in? And just get started and move on from there.
Yeah, and be the active participant. Don't sit back and wait. Find your champions, leverage those champions, but make sure that you are staying active in your life. I just want to share these words from Melissa Houston before we go. She says, I use the mindset of reach back, pull forward. In my role now, I've trained 3 top performers nationally who aren't yet 25. And so for those of us that are a little further along in our careers and maybe have already made the final pivot, just remember that we are part of that community of champions who help the people coming behind us. So make sure that you are reaching back and you are participating in their success. And as Nancy said, when you give like that, when you bring such kindness in the world around you, the dividends that you receive back are huge. Exactly. All right, everyone, this is the end of this episode, but we will see you back again next week. Make sure you go find us on your favorite podcast platform. We will drop all of Nancy's information for you in the show notes so that you can connect with her there. And you're going to want to share this. I know you know some young people that are out there in that first decade of their career that need to hear this inspiration from Nancy during these challenging times in business. So make sure you share the episode. Thank you, Nancy. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rita.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for joining us. If you love this episode, leave us those 5 stars and be sure to share this with a friend. And if you didn't, don't worry about it. See you back here next week.